Hey there. Welcome to the Let's Be Frank podcast. I'm your host, Frank, and I'm just so excited to kick off this podcast with you guys. Here on the Let's Be Frank podcast, it's all about keeping it real. So, essentially, what that means is that we're going to be getting into the facts, we'll be exploring different perspectives, and really diving into some of the big issues that are shaping our world today. So, from politics and culture to social trends and personal insights, each episode is going to be a great chance for us to really break down the noise and just talk about what really matters to you. So, for this first episode, we're tackling a big one, which is the upcoming US election, which is happening tomorrow, Tuesday, 5th of November, 2024. So, the countdown is on. We're less than 24 hours away. And, and obviously, everyone is well aware of the election happening. But my goal is really to just give you a very clear, straightforward look at where each candidate stands on the issues, in terms of what their records are, and what their leadership could mean for the country and the rest of the world moving forward. So here's the plan. We're gonna start by doing a comparison between the main candidates on three main issues. So the first one will be policy proposals. Then we'll look at their ideological stances. And of course, you have to look at their track records. So we'll start by looking at what each candidate is promising on the big issues, such as, healthcare, the economy, and of course, climate policy. Then, we'll dig a little deeper into, what they believe at core level and how that influences the way that they lead. And then finally, we'll take a look at their past actions and their accomplishments because, as the saying goes, the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So this isn't about me, telling you who to vote for. So I'm just putting that disclaimer out there. And it's definitely not about pushing a one-sided narrative either. But my goal here is to really give you a balanced, honest view so that you can come away with a clearer sense of what basically is at stake and what each candidate brings to the table. Because obviously this is the most important election across the world, since we're looking at the most influential and powerful nation on the planet. So, with that said, how about we just dive in and take a quick look at the candidates and their platforms and what the future could hold under their leadership. So buckle up. It's going to be a great first episode of the Let's Be Frank podcast. So, to kick things off here, let's start with the scope of analysis here. So essentially, I'll be comparing the two main candidates: Donald Trump, who's representing the Republican Party, and Kamala Harris, who's representing the Democrats. So we'll look at three core areas. We'll look at policy proposals. We'll look at ideological stances, and of course, we're going to look at their track records. So each of these factors, plays a huge role in helping us to understand, not only what these candidates stand for, but how they might lead the country if they were to get elected. So let's break down what each area involves, starting with policy proposals. So in terms of policy proposals, we're going to look at domestic and foreign policy. So I'll start by just examining their approaches on on like healthcare, the economy, and immigration. So for domestic policy, we know Donald Trump has been drawing on his previous presidency, and he's championed policies like tax cuts and has been known for having a very strong stance in immigration reform. Whereas Kamala Harris, she's she's had a more progressive approach and has advocated for policies aimed at expanding healthcare access, climate initiatives, and basically supporting economic opportunities for low-income communities. And then in terms of foreign policy, Trump has really emphasized an America First approach. That's something that he's sort of reiterated consistently, and often prioritizing like U.S. interests, even if it means distancing from traditional allies, which he has done in his presidency. So whereas Kamala Harris, on the other hand, she seems more aligned with more globalized and corporative stances, which really aims to strengthen diplomatic ties. So, here we'll really try to consider how each candidate plans to address, international challenges like trade, climate change, and of course, international security. And then in terms of the next thing we'll dive deep into is ideological stances. So here, we'll look at their core beliefs and values. which basically form the backbone of their political ideologies. So we know Donald Trump has really positioned himself as a conservative, meaning that he's appealing to more traditional American values, economic deregulation, and of course having a very strong stance in military. Whereas Kamala Harris, she's representing a progressive ideology, which often emphasizes social justice, environmental protection, and government and more government intervention to address systemic issues. So what I'll do here is discuss these foundational beliefs and talk about how they influence each candidate's views on issues like civil rights, corporate regulation, and just the basic role of government in citizens' lives. And then finally, for track records, essentially we're just going to explore each candidate's track records to get a sense of how consistently that they've supported the ideals and the policies that they're proposing now. So as we know, for Donald Trump, his record as president includes significant tax reforms, judicial appointments, and economic policies, and aimed at reducing regulations. So whereas Kamala Harris, in her role as senator and vice president, has a record of advocacy for criminal justice reform, climate initiatives, and health equity. So, looking at their past accomplishments, and obviously you have to look at their controversies as well, and the controversial decisions and moves that they've made. Any shifts in their positions will really give us some good insight as to how effectively each of them might lead and fulfill their promises, in the future, depending on who wins. So, like I said, I'll be comparing these three aspects, and then we'll get a real rounded view of each candidate, and then this would really allow us to see how they differ in terms of their approach and their potential impact on the country. And of course, I'll share my own perspective on what I think these differences mean for the future of America. So, how about we dive right into it? So in terms of policy proposals, we look at different areas like healthcare, the economy, climate policy, education, and of course, foreign affairs. So in terms of healthcare, we know Donald Trump has consistently pushed for a market-driven healthcare system, which aims to reduce government involvement, support private competition, supporting private competition in order to lower costs. And then, he's advocated for, things like repealing and replacing the Affordable Care Act, with options like the association health plans and short-term insurance and increased health savings accounts. So more privatized solutions for Donald Trump is what his sort of priorities have been. So his stance really appeals to those who want less government regulation in healthcare, where in contrast, we have Kamala Harris, who supports expanding the Affordable Care Act with more accessible and affordable coverage options. Where because we also know that she wants back the Medicare for All program, but she's sort of like shifted from that, and she has more of a moderate stance now, which aims at promoting a public option that allows Americans to either keep private insurance if they wish, or to opt into that. But her proposals really emphasize reducing prescription costs, extending coverage, and just bolstering their protections for those with pre-existing conditions. So as you can see clearly, we have Donald Trump who advocates for a more privatized, a less government intervention approach, whereas Kamala Harris wants more government-funded programs and resources for the healthcare. So, which obviously that sort of you'll see that sort of trend in regards to all of their big policy issues. So, like for example, the economy. Trump's economic policies, policy really centers around tax cuts, deregulation, and incentives for the American manufacturing industry. Whereas, he's a strong advocate for, reducing corporate taxes, promoting business growth, and pretty much just investing in energy and industries like oil and coal. So Trump has also, supported job creation through deregulation and has been vocal about, limiting, government intervention in business operations as well too. Whereas in contrast, we have seen that Kamala Harris has really supported a more progressive economic policy, which essentially focuses on, tax reforms, which are aimed at reducing income inequality. And, we know that Kamala has said or advocated for tax relief for low and middle income families while proposing increased taxes in corporations and, of course, the wealthier class. So her economic proposals include, investments in green infrastructure, labor rights, and economic initiatives for more marginalized communities as well too. So, and then Kamala Harris, she she definitely also supports, raising the minimum wage, which is something that the Democrats and Joe Biden and her party have advocated for, and really trying to find ways of enhancing more worker protections. So they're more pro union as well in that regard. And then in terms of climate policy, we know Trump's climate policy is more centered around energy and energy independence and basically more fuel support, fossil fuel support. So he has largely, downplayed climate change time and time again, and he has really rolled back on the environmental regulations that, especially those that were set by the Obama administration when Trump took office the first time because he favors coal, oil, and gas, and of course the gas industries in order to create more jobs and boost the economy. So Trump has been very skeptical of also of international climate agreements. Because once again it's all about the America First agenda. So he has really used that to sort of prioritize American autonomy over global commitments, which hasn't really gone too well, or hasn't really resonated too well with America's strongest allies. Where in contrast, we have seen Kamala Harris and the current administration, they've taken a very aggressive approach to climate change, supporting supporting a transition to cleaner energy through policies such as investment in renewable energy, cutting greenhouse protections, and just pretty much rejoining international climate accords like the Paris agreements. So her stance really includes environmental justice, addressing the disproportionate impact of greenhouse emissions and just of climate issues, and then on low income and minority communities. And of course, Harris really supports legislation for carbon neutral, goals and increased environmental regulations as well too. So it's a very big contrast in their positions to climate policy. And these are all issues that, depending on what your personal motives and ambitions and your own ideologies are, then one of these would definitely resonate more with you because they're so in contrast of one another. And and then also in education, Trump really has sort of like had the approach to education that involves, promoting school choice, advocating for vouchers and charter schools to give parents more options. He definitely favors, decentralizing educational um, institutions and education policy, which pretty much allows states and local governments to really make decisions about the curriculum, funding, and standards. So Trump is definitely more for state funded educational options rather than federal funded options, and he's also pretty much known for being a critic of policies like the Common Core, and prioritizing less federal intervention in education. Whereas Kamala Harris is in contrast to that in terms of increasing federal funding for public schools, teacher salaries and student resources. She favors accessible to early education and free community college programs. Harris also advocates for forgiving student debt, which Joe Biden has done a lot of in his term as president, for canceling a lot of the student debt for low and middle class graduates, and that's something that Kamala Harris has continued to support. And obviously increasing funding for Black colleges and universities, which are also known as HBCUs. So her education stance really focuses on an equitable and expanded opportunity for all students, which has really been a sort of like a real accomplishment for the Biden administration, especially amongst young people, in terms of garnering that support and favorability amongst younger people who are pursuing tertiary level education and needed some debt relief from the high cost of education. So, and then finally, when we're looking at foreign affairs, in terms of international diplomatic relations, Trump's foreign policy has been, characterized as, once again, being that America First approach, because he's really prioritized, reducing U.S. military involvement abroad, because he believes that America shouldn't be the world's police, and he sort of renegotiated agreements like NAFTA, which was the North American Free Trade Agreement, which he reformed to the United States Mexico Canada Agreement, and reducing contributions to international organizations because he views them as not serving U.S. interests, which once again creates a little bit of a tension between the United States and some of its allies and the international community as a whole. So Trump, really supports, tightening immigration policies as well, which he's probably most infamous for, and has adopted, very, I would say, a very transactional view of alliances, which often, prioritizes, national interests over, long-standing diplomatic commitments. So he's known for going to a lot of these international meetings and really scolding, the international community for not, living up to its end of the bargain or doing enough to, to contribute to whatever, Trump has claimed that they haven't contributed enough to in regards to maintaining international order and security across the globe. So, whereas Kamala Harris, really supports a more traditional multilateral approach to foreign policy. So basically, what her idea is focusing more on strengthening alliances, working with international institutions, and Kamala Harris has really advocated for supporting democracy on a global level by addressing human rights issues, cooperating on global challenges like climate change. And Kamala Harris supports a very comprehensive immigration reform that provides a pathway to citizenship and helps to strengthen the refugee admissions program to the United States as well too. So as you can tell, she's very big on pro-immigration issues and more aligned with bilateral agreements and multilateral agreements and relations with the rest of the world compared to Trump, whose focus more is who's sort of like rhetoric is more about only entering into bilateral and multilateral international agreements that benefit the United States directly, whereas Kamala Harris has had a more humanitarian approach. So very big differences in their approaches in that regard, and to all the different policies that we did mention. But so these are all very much influential factors in how you can decide how to support a candidate, because these are issues that affect not just the government, but everyone in all American citizens and most of us across the globe too. But aside from that, another big factor that really influences people to support a candidate is ideological stances. So we know for Donald Trump, his ideology aligns with American conservatism, emphasizing limited government, individual responsibility, and basically, more so like national sovereignty. So he's very skeptical of globalism for economic equity and climate justice and healthcare reform. He's made it very clear. Whereas, uh, um, and he prioritizes more of a strong military and traditional values and a free market economy. And his focus is more on deregulation. So lowering taxes and just limited welfare programs really reflects a belief of self-reliance as well too. So Trump's base often includes those who favor traditional values and limited government oversight, and he's very skeptical of the international institutions, which he's sort of like reemphasized many times even on the international stage. Whereas Kamala Harris, her ideology more aligns with progressive ideals that really emphasize social justice, inclusivity, and obviously more government intervention to address systemic inequality. So more government being hands-on in these issues and proactive. And like I said, her focus really includes policies for economic equity, climate justice, and healthcare reform, which is in contrast to what I mentioned for Trump. And Kamala Harris's stance really reflects, a belief in proactive government measures to protect these civil rights, try to closing economic gaps, and pretty much, providing social safety nets for the middle class and the working class. So her base really includes, voters who prioritize diversity, equity, and progressive change on social issues. So in terms of ideological stances, we see a major shift and a major difference and contrast between the two major candidates. And then finally, for track records, We know Trump's track record is based on his tenure as president, where he enacted significant tax reform bills, nominated three Supreme Court justices, which is almost unprecedented, because usually Supreme Court justices, once they're appointed for life, and they're only replaced upon their death or upon retirement. And those are big moves because the Supreme Court is the highest appellate court in the United States, and it's their job to really be the highest authority in terms of interpreting the Constitution and the law and any sort of disputes within the United States of America. So that's a big deal. And Trump has also implemented policies in immigration reform, which once again sort of been like the flagship, or like the backbone of what his legacy is about, of how he even got into office the first time, being very active in terms of his criticism of immigration. So, and then some of his most notable actions include like the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act bill, and then obviously his executive orders and environmental regulation rollbacks, and just his renegotiation of trade agreements, like I mentioned earlier, NAFTA, which became USMCA. And so essentially, Trump has really shown his consistency in his conservative views, but he's faced a lot of criticism for his high turnover in his administration, because during his time as presidency, he had a lot of staff who left, a lot of his secretaries resigned, and most importantly, most notoriously, his divisive rhetoric. Everyone remembers Trump referring to Muslim majority countries as S-hole countries. He said it in a more, crude way. And, the way he's sort of like addressed systemic issues like, police brutality and protests against that. He's been very, harsh with his criticism. And then he's been very lenient with his criticism of white nationalism within the United States. So just based on his rhetoric alone has really dissuaded a lot of people from wanting to support him, and has turned a lot of people to be sort of rebellious against a Trump administration and a Trump presidency and a Trump second term. So that's something that was one of the main reasons why he was even voted out of office as well, aside from his record. So. But in contrast to that, in terms of Kamala Harris's track record, we're looking at her tenure as U.S. Senator and Vice President. So she advocated for criminal justice reform, affordable health care, and civil rights issues. And then as Vice President, she really worked on, on a pandemic response, racial equity issues, and climate initiatives, which are in line with we're pretty much in line with what she's continuing to advocate for now. And, Kamala Harris's record really reflects a focus on equity and reform in terms of, social issues. And then, although she has faced a lot of scrutiny over her prosecutorial record when she was the district attorney over in California, which a lot of people would argue, conflicts with her current progressive stance, which is true and fair, because, if you look at her record, there are a lot of controversial decisions she made in terms of either, people who she prosecuted, she might have prosecuted too harshly, or other criminals who she didn't prosecute and were too lenient with. So there were some controversial decisions made at the time. But I think overall, when you look at their track records, if you look at all of the negatives from their past, and how they've addressed them, Trump has never apologized for anything he's done negatively. Trump's character is always to double down and reemphasize that he's proud of what he did, whereas Kamala Harris has a more remorseful approach and a more progressive approach in addressing her mistakes and trying to alleviate those mistakes with changing her mindset and her ideals. So that's for me, when I look at their track records, I think that's like one of the biggest factors in terms of how to define or how to characterize both candidates and what you can possibly expect from both candidates in the future. So with that said, we looked at, policy proposals, we looked at ideologies, and we just assessed their track records. Now, I do have before I give you my official opinion on who I think is going to win this election, I think there are some key performance indicators that could determine who that could determine how each candidate has a pathway to the White House. So for Trump, we need to see polling resilience in key swing states. We need to see strong support from his core base, and we definitely need to see uh, potential. Well, possibly we could look at potential low voter turnout in demographic in some of the democratic demographics. Meaning, if voter turnout is low amongst young voters, people of color, and suburban moderates who lean Democrat, then Trump's consistent support could give him that huge edge. For instance, younger voters tend to turn out at a lower rate compared to older demographics. So if there's any drop off in the young vote, then that could seal victory and a clear pathway for Trump second term presidency. And then in terms of just maintaining his strong core base, Donald Trump has the most loyal, consistent grassroots base I've ever witnessed in my lifetime. Even we even witnessed it within the Republican primaries, where he wiped out the competition with Nikki Haley, Mike Pence, his former VP, and even Ron DeSantis, who's a rising star within the Republican Party. He, basically, Trump had won every primary, almost every primary that counted. And regardless of all of the prosecution issues he has, the legal battles, the controversial decisions he's made, his sort of ultra white right wing approach sometimes, and his crude response to people, his base have really stood by him no matter what. So I think amongst all candidates, the Trump core faction will always stand tall with him. So that's why it is imperative for the Democrats to really make sure they galvanize support amongst young people and the people who are not always the most inclined to vote during these election cycles. So, and then in terms of Kamala Harris's, path to the White House, in contrast to Trump, she needs those, she needs more of a change in demographic, meaning, as the U.S. electorate is becoming more diverse, with increasing number of young people being eligible to vote, especially the non-white, college-educated voters, who generally lean Democrat. She needs those people to show up. Those people need to show up. Millennials and Gen Z, are more progressive and more likely to vote for candidates who support social justice, climate action, and accessible healthcare. These are issues that young people very much resonate with now. So these are key issues for Kamala Harris, and she needs these people to show up. She also needs women to show up. Kamala Harris has the potential to be the first woman president, the first woman of color elected to the most powerful nation on the planet. So this will be the first time ever, an historic achievement if she becomes president. So that's why I think that alone, that could really help to galvanize women to come out and vote more for her. And as you can see within past elections, the gender gap has always been significant in terms of the number of women to men who come out to vote. So like in the 2020 election, far more women turned out at higher rates than men. And, a similar trend like that could really help to benefit Kamala Harris, in this election. And then obviously, like I said, she needs those young people to vote, especially, the Gen Z and the millennials. And, the young people who are big on things like climate change, student debt relief, and social justice. Those are going to be some of her strongest, dependency in terms of people who she needs to vote for her in order to secure the White House. So, and then obviously swing states are the most crucial aspect of this election for both candidates. So Kamala Harris and Trump both need strong turnout in swing states like places like Florida, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, which could ultimately decide the election. Because every election cycle, we see these are pretty much the states that always determine who wins the White House. Because in every election, they could swing red or they could swing blue, in comparison to other states which normally stay the same. But these few states, which are called the swing states, could ultimately decide, who gets enough electoral college votes that would secure the 270 mark and, ultimately lead to the path to the White House. So the argument for Kamala Harris's victory, really hinges on, like I said, changing demographics, support in urban and swing state areas, and just her general appeal to women and young voters. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, his edge really lies in, the enthusiasm of his core base, which like I said, are very loyal to him already. Economic concerns, which he has already been addressing in all of his rallies and campaign ads. Rural voter support. So once the rural working class whites turn out to vote, then typically that would prove to be very beneficial for Trump. And I think another thing that a lot of people might be overlooking is that Trump might have one thing that could help Trump win is voter support and potential structural advantages within the electoral college. Because in the United States, not about which candidate gets the most votes, but which candidate gets the most electoral college votes. Because every state is assessed is designated a certain number of electoral college votes, which represents the total population. So states like California and Texas have a high number of electoral college votes, where states like Idaho and South Dakota would have a smaller number of electoral college votes. But once a candidate wins a state, then it's a winner take all for all of those electoral college votes. So that could be the deciding factor for Trump, because in 2016 Hillary Clinton had more total number of votes on a national level, but Trump won more electoral college votes because he won places like Michigan and Wisconsin. So that's something that people really need to keep an eye on in terms of what could really be the deciding factor of who wins this election. And for Trump, getting those electoral college votes are the most crucial aspect for him to getting that victory. So both sides really have compelling indicators, and the outcome definitely maybe we ultimately just depend on which factors hold the most sway, over undecided and independent voters, because that's what it could potentially just come down to. But with that said, in terms of my opinion, I would lean towards more of a Trump presidency and a victory in terms of mainly because I give Trump the edge in this election, because I believe his strong base of enthusiastic supporters could ultimately really help him. He has a very strong appeal to rural voters, especially the white working class voters, and the economic concerns that continue to just dominate the national discourse and the news would really give him a unique advantage. Every day we see issues about inflation, immigration, crime, those sort of issues. And then obviously we have the wars that's taking place across the world. So it looks like America is not as strong, and a little bit of an instability amongst, the world right now. And in crises like that, you want to see that America looks strong and America looks like it's in a powerful position, which a lot of people question right now. So, and then obviously, like I said, the structure of the electoral college has historically favored candidates with higher rural support, which could, tip the scales in Trump's favor. So, but regardless of that, the dynamics of this election are still very much complex, and the outcome is far from certain. But that's just my opinion. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'll be right, but I have a strong feeling that that's what it could be. And that's not to say that I support Donald Trump in any way, but I just think that given his momentum, he could come out on top. But that's just left to be seen, right? But that's just my take. So, what do you think? The whole purpose of this is to get your opinion and to have a discourse about who do we feel could potentially be pulling ahead, or do you think Trump is pulling ahead, or do you think Kamala Harris has the momentum to secure a win? Regardless, it's going to be a historic win for either candidate. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, your critiques, and any insights into in the comments below of this video. Your perspectives really add a lot to the conversation, and it's always great to hear from what others might have to say and what matters most to you. So, let me know what topics you'd like to hear on future episodes. Whether it's more political analysis, social issues, or just something entirely different. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, and really try to just stay tuned for more in-depth discussions. And just look out for my next video, which is coming out pretty soon. But as of today, thanks for tuning in to the Let's Be Frank podcast. I'm so happy that we could have this episode 1, and look forward to many more episodes and discussions with you, and diving into the next topic. So all the best and happy election watch. And, we'll be back here to do a summary and to do a review of whichever candidate wins tomorrow night. And that'll probably be my next video to see, sort of reaction to who won and what were some of the key, performance indicators, and, to see whether or not we were right and to see what could that mean for the future. So stay tuned, stay locked, and stay safe. All the best.